Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Secretary, Admiral, Mr. Hale, thank you very much for all of your service to our country and performing difficult jobs in good times. These are difficult times, and we appreciate your great leadership. Mr. Secretary, I want to raise an issue with you, which probably comes as no surprise, but on April the 7th at a media roundtable, you said that the 2010 defense budget recommendations that you announced on April the 6th are, quote, basically an outgrowth of the positions that I've been taking in speeches for the last 18 months, and that your decisions didn't spring all of a sudden full-grown out of the brow of Zeus in the last 3 months, end quote. But I think it's fair to say that the decision on the next generation bomber must have sprung full-grown out of the brow of Zeus in the last 3 months. I want to point back to something that you said 8 months ago during a speech at the National Defense University, where you said that China's, and again I quote, investments in cyber and anti-satellite warfare, anti-air and anti-ship weaponry, submarines and ballistic missiles could threaten America's primary means to project power and help allies in the Pacific. This will put a premium on America's ability to strike from over the horizon, employ missile defenses, and will require shifts from short-range to long-range systems such as the next generation bomber, end quote. And you use virtually the same language in an article for the first quarter 2009 edition of Joint Force Quarterly, as well as in a Foreign Affairs article in January of this year. And so for several months prior to that April 6th announcement, you had established a clear record of support for the next generation bomber. On April the 6th, you announced that the Department would not pursue a development program for the follow-on Air Force bomber. My question is, what changed between January and April to make you question the need for the next generation bomber, and how do you reconcile clearly positions that are contradictory with regard to that weapon system?
Actually, this is one of the issues, Senator, that where I felt we did not have enough analysis to make a firm decision, and so it's one of the issues that will be addressed in both the Quadrennial Defense Review and the Nuclear Posture Review. My own personal view is we probably do need a follow-on bomber, but I think we need to see what, if you look at both of those studies, the QDR and the Nuclear Posture Review, and you observe what is going on in the arms control negotiations with Russia in particular on nuclear forces, I think all of those things will shape what decision needs to be made with respect to a next generation bomber. One of the reasons that I said we would cancel the studies or the effort that was underway at the time was based on consultation with the chairman, the vice chairman, and others. Our concern was that if we didn't do that, that when these studies were done, there would be a kind of a linear projection of the thinking that had existed before the studies were done in terms of exactly what kind of plane should be built. One of the things I think we need to think about is whether, for example, the follow-on bomber needs to have a pilot in it. And so I think that this is one of those issues that I didn't make a decision against going forward with a next generation bomber, but rather said, let's wait and see what the result, let's examine this in the QDR and in the Nuclear Posture Review, and then make a decision on where we go with the next generation bomber.
Well, in response to a question that was posed by Senator Inhofe earlier, you said that the last QDR, the 2006 QDR, shaped and informed a lot of your decisions, and the 2006 QDR directed the Air Force to field a follow-on bomber by the year 2018. And so I guess my question is, what part of that QDR has been invalidated, or what has changed in terms of the threat-based analysis that, in your mind, modifies or changes that requirement? I mean, it was pretty clearly articulated in the 2006 QDR, and that's actually what helped shape many of your decisions with respect to some of these decisions that you made recently.
Well, I mean, the reality is that we have a lot more experience in the last 2 to 3 years with unmanned aerial vehicles than they had at the time that the last QDR was put together. Also, we basically weren't going anywhere at the last time of the last QDR in terms of significant potential further arms reductions with the Russians. And I think depending on where those numbers come out, it's going to affect how we shape the triad, or or raise the question whether we still need a triad, depending on the number of deployed weapons nuclear weapons that we need.
It doesn't seem like that those discussions with Russia, though, ought to have an impact on whether or not we're developing next-generation bomber. And secondly, I mean, I think that, and you've had experience in some of those arms reductions negotiations in the past, if they are supposed to conclude by the end of this year, I'd be very surprised if they will. And this could extend sometime into the future. So, you know, making a decision like this right now, I guess to me it becomes a question of whether or not this is driven more by budget decisions and trying to get under the top line of the defense budget, or whether it's driven by requirements. And I guess that would be my question. I mean, is this a decision that, did OMB say you've got to terminate this program?
No, I don't remember what their passback said, but frankly, I took some of their suggestions from the passback and didn't take a lot of others. This actually didn't really have this really was not a top line or a budget-driven figure, because the amount of money in the budget for FY10 for a next-generation bomber was very small.
Well, do you have, what did the Air Force recommend on this for their FIDEP for 2010?
I think actually, I think they had it in until these decisions were made. But I mean, if I could just speak a little of this, and this actually goes to Senator Chambliss's comments as well. Is, I mean, we're at a real time of transition here in terms of the future of aviation, and the whole issue of what's going to be manned and what's going to be unmanned, what's going to be stealthy, what isn't, how do we address these threats? This is all part, and it's changing even from 2006. And I think, you know, from a warfighting perspective, I think this is at the heart of what we need to look at for the future, whether it's fighters or bombers, quite frankly. And I think that's, you know, that's been the essence of this discussion, despite analysis which may have been out there in the past, or some other requirement, and a service requirement, which quite frankly is a service requirement. It doesn't make it a Department of Defense requirement necessarily. So what the aviation side of this is, I think, is very much focused on this change, and I think we're at the beginning of this change. I mean, there are those that see JSF as the last manned fighter or fighter bomber or jet, and I'm one. You know, I'm one that's inclined to believe that. I don't know if that's exactly right, but this all speaks to the change that goes out, you know, many, obviously decades, including how much unmanned we're going to have and how it's going to be resourced.
We've had I shouldn't say all, we've had a lot of combatant commanders in front of this committee who've testified to the need for this capability, and also to the concern about the aging fleet and the fact that half of our bombers are pre-Cuban Missile Crisis era bombers, and being able to persist and penetrate some of the more sophisticated air defense systems that we're expecting to encounter in the future. So it seems like it's a very, very relevant real-time question, but I guess my final question is this. What I hear you saying is you are still analyzing and looking at this. What OMB's budget said was terminate. So is this delayed? Is this terminated? What is the status?
The program that was on the books is terminated. The idea of a next generation bomber, as far as I'm concerned, is a very open question, and the recommendation will come out of the quadrennial defense review and the nuclear posture review. And I certainly don't want to leave the impression that the Russians are going to help us decide whether or not we have a next generation bomber. What I was trying to say is, when we end up with, if it looks like we're headed for a lower number of deployed nuclear weapons, then we will have to make a recommendation to the President and to you how we allocate those weapons among missiles, submarines, and aircraft.
Thank you.
Chairman, my time's up. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thune.